Welcome to Agreeable Disagreements. I'm Cameron, and this is my co-host, Andrew.
Hello. This is a podcast where two friends from differing political ideologies come together and talk about an event from the week and try and find some common ground.
And we're kind of picking up this week on where we left off last week, because we bit off a bit more than we could chew with the Biden student loan relief plan. And we talked a lot about really the problems with student loans.
We also got really sidetracked with TikTok.
We did. We recorded like an hour and a half or more. And after I cut out a good chunk, it was still down to 1 hour and 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So yeah, we got sidetracked a lot. So we want to stick to the script, not the script, because this isn't scripted. We want to stick to the agenda a little bit more today. So,
yes.
Do you just want to really quick give us a reminder of what the student loan relief plan or topic or issue going on is?
Yeah. So actually, I have the White House fact sheet pulled up because I actually need to give myself a reminder. Basically, it would provide up to $20,000 in loan relief for borrowers from loans from the Department of Education who make an income of less than $125,000 or $250,000 for married couples and who received Pell Grants.
Okay. And why? I want to hear in your words, because I'm assuming the media you consume and the media I consume don't always line up. But in your words, why is this controversial?
I think it's controversial because a lot of people, mainly I think a lot of people are worried about the burden that it would put on our national debt and our ability to fund that kind of a relief plan, which is essentially kind of a stimulus. I also think that there's a lot of people that have a vested interest in maintaining loans as they are now, which I think for the average borrower isn't really working for them.
Right. Well, I think that's one side of why it's controversial. I think another side of why it's a controversial topic is people trying to argue, is this really something everybody should be paying for? That's another side to it.
Right. Or that, I had to pay for it, so
you should too. Yeah, there's some of that. And we'll get to that, I think, in a minute. But I know you really wanted to hit on, and I think that this would explain a lot about the situation we're in, the interest rates.
Yes. Yeah. So as I stated last week, I'm very close to somebody who was very high up in the Oregon Higher Education Coordinating Commission, which oversees all of the public universities in Oregon. And what he explained to me was that around the time, I think it was like the 70s when we started offering basically loans to anyone who wanted to go to college because, if you came from a lower socioeconomic background or were in some way, from a disadvantaged demographic, you should still be able to go to school. The way that it worked was that so the Fed, sets interest rates. Banks will set their interest rates based on what the Fed sets. They're going to be a little higher because the banks want to make some profit themselves.
Right.
But the way that student loans worked was that student loans were offered at a lower rate from the interest rate, so that you could still get an education at a lower cost than, previously you would have had to do if you had just borrowed from a bank. And that provided an incentive, that benefited the government also because, the more educated people you have, the more people you have entering, skilled jobs, the more money you have flowing through the economy. So it was kind of a win-win for everybody. Since then, what we've seen is third-party kind of middlemen, loan servicers such as Navient, which is my loan servicer, or Mohila, which has been in the news a lot recently. What's happened, since 1970s to now, is that say the interest rate is 2%, and that's not an accurate figure. We're just using that for instance. Say that's 2%. These loan servicers who are acting on behalf of the government, but not actually government entities, they're providing their loans at, like, say 8%.
Right.
So what's happened is that, and we talked a little bit about this last week, so tuition is continually going up. It's kind of a vicious cycle of, the federal government not spending as much or giving as much to universities because they can see that students are paying more, but they're basing that kind of off of the fact that universities are continuing to raise their tuition and, still getting students, but
right.
The university is raising their tuitions because they're getting less money from the federal government. So what we've seen is people going from, having these fairly reasonable loans that they can, pay back, not only the interest, but the principal, to people sometimes can't even pay the interest. And the principal just sits there and never really gets,
right.
gets paid off, which just perpetually keeps them in debt, and it continues to spiral.
Right. And so looking at, you mentioned the White House fact sheet on the situation earlier, and so yes. I pulled that up as well. One of the things that sticks out to me, and I know that they're bringing race into it because it does disproportionately affect minorities who have, generally speaking, lower income. Mm-hmm. But I do think it speaks for all people to some degree, who are not in that upper middle class or whatnot. But 20 right. years after first enrolling in school, they say, and this is a quote, the typical black borrower who started college in the 1995-96 school year still owed 95% of their original student debt 20 years later. And, interest rates is part of that, but it's also, I think, combined with the fact that they have student loan payment plans. So, I'm looking at my student loan servicer, Great Lakes, right now, and I'm not going to pull up like my individual numbers, but I know that the payment replanner that I'm in right now, if I were to start repaying immediately, the forbearance were to end, I would currently have to pay $350 a month, which
right.
would be hard, but I could swing it. And if that's the case, I would be done in 10 years.
Well, so does that, I'm assuming that that's your loans, correct?
Yes.
That's your payment, not your payment and what your wife would have to pay. And are you
Correct.
basing that off of your combined income or just your income?
That's a good question. I wish I had that answer. I do not know. But looking at the other repayment options, I know that there's some where it's, they do look at combined income. Now that I'm going through it.
Would factor into what the payment would be.
Right.
But your wife also has loans too.
She does. And so, it's gonna be a lot. But looking at, just off the top of my head, having just a general idea of what I've had in the past, it's something like $100 for some of them. And some of them where you don't have to pay for a long time until your income is a certain amount. But I mean, you're still going to accrue interest, even though you're not in a position where you can make the monthly payment they want you to make. And that's why these people are
if it's
still owing.
Loans.
Right.
Like it's, I can't remember if it's subsidized or unsubsidized, but one of them, well, no, I guess while you're in college, you don't accrue interest, but afterwards.
Yes. So subsidized do not accrue interest while you're in college. Unsubsidized do.
Yeah. I just perpetually think of myself as still in college.
But I mean, think of it like, I have a friend who is a teacher. Mm-hmm. And granted, she made a decision.
Is it you, Cameron?
It is not me. It is not me. But
a friend.
But I have a friend who I met my first year teaching, and she, granted, made a decision that she did not have to make. She was from California, and she went to school at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. So she was...
Oh, right. You...
I think I mentioned this a little bit last week.
You mentioned her last week.
But she had over $100,000 in student loans.
Yeah.
And now, part of that, I will readily say, is on her. She did not have to go from a extremely high cost of living place in California, where she had in-state tuition, to a higher cost of living place in Honolulu, where she had out-of-state tuition and all of those like cost of living expenses. Mm-hmm. But that is still a ridiculous amount for 4 years of college to go into teaching. You know, I don't see, if those were my loans, I do not think I would ever be able to pay those off.
Yeah. I mean, that I do feel like that kind of goes into another topic, which is just how abysmally poorly we value teachers in this country.
Yeah.
But I mean, for any job, I think that requires a post-bac degree, you shouldn't be that far into debt to the point where you're never going to be able to pay it off. If you have a graduate degree, I feel like you've done enough work where you should be able to get any job that you get within your field, should be able to pay off, whatever your schooling was.
I would say yes, should, but at the same time, like, I understand that the market is going to add value or take value away from whatever job you have, right? So if I get a PhD in art history and I become a curator, for a museum, but let's say, because that's a really hard job to get, I'm only able to become a curator for a small-time museum, like maybe the Schnitzer Museum in Eugene. That's not going to pay me the same as if I'm a curator for the Louvre, right?
But if you go to school to become a teacher, and then you become a teacher, you should be able to pay off your loans that you paid to become a teacher.
Now, I will say that there are some federal programs that offer teachers specifically student loan forgiveness. And it's not just Teach for America.
There are hundreds. There are hundreds of programs to offer a lot of people certain amounts of student loan forgiveness. And I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think this is an important PSA. If anyone listening needs help on their student loans, you do a half-hour Google search. You can find Kansas has a student loan repayment relief for just moving to Kansas, or there's income-based repayment, or certain things like that. So I just want to make sure that people know that there are options out there, but Anyway, I'm so sorry for interrupting.
No, but that's a great thing to specify on because it's not just open to teachers, and that's something I forget about because I'm not really in that side of the world.
Right.
But, aside from programs that are set up by the government to incentivize people to move to certain places, have certain careers,
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about something that's completely different, which is across the board, everybody gets student loan relief unless you make over a certain amount of money. And is that
Well, not
Mhm.
necessarily. And this
Okay?
is actually something that I just learned. It's the Pell Grant part. Um, so the Pell Grant, for those who don't know, and I may be getting some of this wrong, but I know that the Pell Grant is typically given to lower to students from lower income families
Yep.
or somehow non-traditional students. So, for instance, I got Pell Grants after I turned 24 because I was outside of the typical college age range.
Hmm.
So it's not uh, student loan relief for everybody. It's student loan relief specifically for people who for some reason or another receive these Pell Grants, which are, I think the intention of them uh, is equity, to provide a little bit of a boost for people who kind of started below the um, below the mark.
So, and on that note, according to the Department of Education, um, oh, wait, no, that's something different. So, according to CNBC, that would be about
Uh-huh.
425,000 student loan borrowers.
Yeah.
Nope, wait, that's who have already had it forgiven. I'm trying to find a statistic that would say how many people. Oh, okay, Forbes in 2022 September, according to the White House fact sheet, it would be 40 million people.
Yeah. Well, I'm saying 43, but yeah.
Okay. Okay. So 43 million people who would receive forgiveness under Biden's plan.
Yeah.
That still seems like a
That's a significant number of people.
it's a significant number of people, and it's a significant number of significant percentage of college goers, I would
Yes.
think.
Yeah.
So, like, let's see. How many Americans attended college? Um, I mean, just in 2020 alone, enrollment was 15.85 million, but I'm not saying a total. Okay, so more than 39 million Americans have attended college but earned no degree or other credential. About 44% of Americans aged 25 or older have some type of college degree. So, I mean, I wonder then,
Okay.
is it actually going to be the majority of people who attended some amount of college? That's a good question.
I I I don't think so. I don't think that math checks out because there's what 350 million Americans.
Some about there, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it would be yeah, 43 million is well, no, okay, so if we take
So that's about 154 million. 44% of 350 million is 154 million people who are currently age 25 or older and
yeah,
have some kind of degree, whether that's an associate, a certificate from college, bachelor's, master's, PhD.
yeah,
Um,
well, and then I think you have to take into account how many of those borrowed. um,
right.
so I would say about a third. I think this bill will affect about a third of
Okay.
uh, people who went to college, whether
Interesting.
they borrowed or not.
So I haven't
That's
thought
still,
of
I
it
mean,
in the
that's
sense
a significant chunk.
it is, and I haven't thought of it in the sense of those numbers yet. I mean, I've done a lot of thinking about the student loan relief plan, but I haven't
Uh,
thought of it in the terms of those specific numbers. And I don't know if it changes my position a whole lot to know that it's really just a third of people who have been to college, because that I think is significantly lower than what I originally had anticipated.
Yeah, well, I think that's what a lot of people are trying to, and I don't even think it's people on the opposition or on or who are advocating for student loan. I think both sides have, at least from what I've heard, I think both sides are trying to push this as this is going to affect everyone. It's just that where they differ is, one side is saying, oh, this is going to help everyone, and one side is saying this is going to be detrimental for everyone.
So doing some extra math then, if each one of those 43 million people get $20,000 in student loan forgiveness, that's $860 billion. And if we were to spread that out across each and every of the 350,000,
up to $20,000.
Right, but let's look at on the higher end just for the sake of saying most extreme situation. All right,
yeah,
$860 billion. Let's not even spread that across every American. Let's see how many Americans pay taxes.
I
just
think
to see
where you're going.
I just want to see how much it would cost each taxpayer individually. So, taxpayer in 2020.
I don't think it would cost them hardly anything.
Well, let's see. So it's $860 billion divided by 157.5 million people who filed tax returns in 2020, according to taxfoundation.org. I'm assuming it's not too different a few years later. Comes out to $5,460.32 per taxpayer.
But here's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you remove that debt from those 43 million people, what are they going to do with that money? They're going to go out and spend it.
Right.
And presumably, they're going to spend it on things that will generate tax revenue, whether that's through sales tax, property tax, what have you. What's happening right now is that this money is being collected and really just being held, and it's not circulating through the economy. If you remove this debt burden from these people, from the 43 million people who will be affected by this, they because they're making less than $120,000,
mm-hmm.
They don't have the ability to just sit on that cash the same way that Elon Musk does. So at that point, you have true trickle-down economics.
I was just going to say, you are making an argument for trickle-down economics.
Yes, but not in the way that Reagan would, because Reagan's version of trickle-down economics was a sham.
No, I think it is the exact same. The whole idea that trickle-down economics is you give people more money from the top, and it trickles down. You're doing the exact same.
Happens. That's not what happens, because when you give people up at the top that money, it doesn't trickle down because they don't spend it. They sit on it.
So here's the thing.
This is trickle up economics. You give people at the bottom the money, and it filters up to the top.
Okay, so here's
people on the bottom don't have the ability to save it. Sorry.
So no, you're right. But the key point here is whether or not people are going to spend the money. And that is less a factor of does it come from the top down or the bottom up, and more a factor of what is the economic status at that time. Because if the economy is booming, people are going to spend their money. If the economy is teetering or down, people are historically less likely to spend their money and more likely to hold on to it. And we're in that...
Except for the people at the bottom who don't have the ability to save their money.
Everybody always is going to have their essentials that they need to pay for. You're right. But if you're at the bottom and you get an extra $5,500 or $30,000, you know what? I would not go buy something right now. If my student loans were forgiven right now, that is not actually $30,000 that goes into my pocket. That is $30,000 I don't have to worry about right now. And that is not something that I can spend. It's something that I can just take a weight off of my shoulders. It's not like I magically have $30,000 more dollars. It's I don't have to pay it to the government over 30 years.
So I see what you're saying, but here's where I think your logic is flawed. If you suddenly don't have this debt, so for me, if the government suddenly gave me $5,000 right now, I can guarantee you I'm not going to be putting it in a savings account. I would love to put it in a savings account, but what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to pay off my credit card. I'm going to fix my car so that I can, go to work and get a job that I don't have to walk to. And I'm not saying this is my situation right now.
No, I understand what you're saying.
The choices that I would make if I was in those circumstances. I think what I disagree with is your premise that in a recession people are going to be saving money because people have less money to save. And it's not, and you're right, it's not that they're giving us checks for $20,000. It's $20,000 that we now don't have to pay. But it's $20,000 that doesn't need to go to that can now go to other things that people have been putting off. And there's definitely stuff that people have been putting off, whether that's, paying for their children to go to, a daycare rather than having to find a job that allows them to work from home that's less than ideal, but at least, they're saving money because they don't have to pay for childcare. Whether that's, paying off credit cards, whether that's buying healthier food to be, to just get better nutrition. There are things, if people have less debt, that money is going to go to, unless you have so much money that you can already pay for all of that stuff.
So there are some things in what you're saying which are 100% correct, which is what I said earlier. Everybody always has their essentials that they need to buy. While you were talking, I Googled what we're talking about. I Googled, do people spend more or less during a recession? And not a single source says that people spend the same or more. They all say economic output, employment, and consumer spending drop in a recession. People dine out at cheaper places, purchase less durable goods, go on less vacations. Brands must take into account the significant shift in consumer spending that may occur during the first 3 months of a recession. The only consumer staples which enjoy a steady demand are things like toothpaste, soap, and shampoo. People don't spend as much money, you're right, partially because they have less money to spend, but also because they don't know what's going to happen next. There has not been a time in history when there was a recession where people did not hold on to their money more.
Spend less money.
Not just spend less money, but try and hold on to it more because they don't know what's going to happen. If we're in a recession,
sure, that's human nature. But I think the issue that I'm having is the assumption that they are trying to hold on to that money. Yeah, I mean, logically, yes, they're going to try to hold on to that money out of necessity, but are they actually able to hold on to any of that money? Or do they simply just have less money to spend?
I think it's all of the above, right? Because you have, let's think about the Great Depression, where people were literally sewing their money into their curtains so that they wouldn't be tempted to spend it all immediately in case something happened. Jimmy breaks their arm, you got to take him to the hospital. Good thing mom sewed that, $100 bill into the, the couch cushion or whatever. People are going to hold on to their money more because they know it goes less far. And so I
think they're going to attempt to hold on to their money more. I don't know if they're going to be successful.
Some people are, some people aren't.
It's impossible for them to be successful when they have less money. There's always going to be something that comes up that's going to require you to spend that money.
You're right. I mean, as someone who's had to replace head gaskets and ball joints and bearings and carpet in my house, like all within one right after another, I agree. There's always going to be something that comes up. That's life. But not everybody is going to have that something during a recession. You might be someone who gets hit with an expensive hospital bill and a house burning down, sure, but you might be someone who gets hit with absolutely nothing other than things cost more money right now.
Yeah, I mean, sure. I think that there is. I think there's more. I think it's more likely of a chance that you are going to get hit with something, although that is coming from somebody who, for our listeners who don't know this, I got a flesh-eating parasite last year.
I forgot about that. I forgot you had that.
That the only medication available for it cost $50,000.
Jeez.
And then last December, my car got hit 4 times within a month while I was sitting on this couch, and it was parked behind me on the street.
Jeez. I hate to laugh at that. It's
maybe I've just had bad luck. I mean, you know what? If you don't laugh, you cry.
That's fair.
So maybe I'm just cynical. But, I mean, it is those kinds of things. And I mean, you could say, like, oh, you shouldn't have gone to Costa Rica. Sure.
Yeah, but you don't know that you're going to get a flesh-eating parasite in Costa Rica.
Yeah, I mean, it's quick sidebar. The parasite is leishmaniasis, and it's the second most common parasitic ailment in the world, but less than 1,000 people in the U.S. get it every year, which is why there's one single medication available for it, approved by the FDA within America. It's made by one single company, and it's so rare to get and such a rare medication to need that the CEO of the company that actually makes it called me multiple times to help me work through the logistics. Wow. And then he actually only charged me $100 for it. So
that's actually really cool.
Thanks, Todd. He gets a tax break from the government, so he still gets a $50,000 paycheck. Still looks to my insurance like they paid $50,000,
right?
But I personally was only charged $100.
That's really cool.
But I mean, it is those kinds of things. Whether it's an illness, whether it's a car accident, whether it's your landlord raising your rent or deciding that they're not going to pay for all of your utilities, or you get laid off of work, or there's a bunch of things. I mean, I think the number of things that happen to people that put financial strain on them are far more frequent than the things that give them greater purchasing power.
Right, but these things don't just happen during a recession. These things happen always. The difference is, right, when you're not in a recession, your money goes farther. So you don't have to worry as much about saving up for a flesh-eating parasite, your car getting hit, your carpet having to be replaced or something like that. You don't have to worry as much.
You don't have the ability. You have less of an ability to save up.
So what people do, you're right. So what people do is instead of buying the frozen bag of mozzarella sticks, they just stick to the essentials. So spending does go down because they have to. Yeah. They're going to stick to the essentials and cut out things they don't need so they can save up, because their income isn't going to change. In a perfect world, it's going to stay the same or increase. But most people have an income that stays the same or goes down in a recession, while things, the cost of things is going to go up. And so no matter who you are, you're going to cut back to some degree, unless you're like a mega rich person. But even then, most people during a recession are going to spend less money on things. And so to get back to the original point we're talking about is, just because you cancel student loan debt does not necessarily mean that money is going to trickle right back into the economy, because it might not.
That's the part that I'm disagreeing with, because specifically with this plan, what they're targeting are the people who are on the lower socioeconomic end of the spectrum.
Right.
Those people are going to be spending whatever, if they have, whether it's, they get a stimulus check and they have more money, or they just have less debt and now they don't have to pay, a certain bill. Those people are going to be putting that money into the economy because they don't have choice.
Are you a well-adjusted and emotionally intelligent adult who worries that your lack of toxic behaviors will bore your significant other? Have you recently had a streak of good fortune and need to be humbled before you become simply unbearable? Do you have a healthy and loving relationship with your father and thus never experienced the trauma you needed to become the tortured artist you always dreamed of being? Introducing Worse Help. Our team of wholly unqualified, unlicensed, and morally flexible therapists are standing by right now to belittle, gaslight, and reinforce your intrusive thoughts about your coworkers secretly hating you. Start now by taking our free quiz, where you'll tell us your fears and deepest insecurities. Don't have any deep insecurities? Don't worry, you will. We'll then match you with a therapist handpicked to meet your specific needs. And if for any reason you want to switch therapists, you can't. So suck it up, crybaby, and remember to use code BUCKLEUPBUTTERCUP for 20% off your first session. Again, that code is BUCKLEUPBUTTERCUP for 20% off right now, and you'll be guzzling down a half gallon of absinthe and painting your masterpiece before you can say Toulouse-Lautrec. So try Worse Help today. It's just like BetterHelp, but worse.
Maybe this is where we take our namesake into account, and we just, on this point, we just agree to disagree, because there is a bunch more that we need to get to.
There is.
About Biden's debt relief.
So let's because you're right, and I am getting a little heated on that. I apologize.
No, I know. I think this is the most heated that we've got, and like most of like the feedback that I get about this show from friends and family is how nice it is to actually listen to people who are like, they're talking about things that could be contentious issues, and they're not getting heated. And I mean, I think this is probably the most heated that we've got. But
let's be clear, we're not name calling each other or anything like that. We're still being civil. I just am raising my voice.
I mean, that's exactly what a stupid head would say. That was such a bad attempt at name calling. You have to know it wasn't sincere. That's what a doo-doo face would say.
All right. So on a similar note, is it right to cancel student loan debt in the sense that everybody, regardless of whether you are a student loan borrower or not, has to pay for it? Like, as taxpayers, everybody who pays taxes is paying for it. Is that fair?
Yeah. So before we talk about that, I think because we just spent a bunch of time talking about how, like, whether or not it would affect the economy, let's just, for the sake of the conversation, I mean, I think overall, yes, it is going to cost money. We can argue about the extent of which.
Yeah, the money has to come from somewhere. I will readily agree to that.
You and I agree that it is going to cost your average taxpayer some amount of money.
Right. And clearly people who make more money, they're higher up in the tax bracket, they're paying more to that. People lower in the tax bracket paying less.
Yeah. But is it so I think we should maybe confine the question to, should the burden of this relief be put on other people to any extent?
That's a great way to word it. That is a great way to word it. I love that.
And thank you. I would say yes. I would say that is part of the cost of living in America, the same way that you pay for roads that you may not necessarily use, the same way that I think you should be paying for health care, whether or not you go to the hospital, or whether or not you've ever, been to the hospital. The same way that I think that you should be paying into education, even if you, don't have kids and they're not going to school. I think that this is a common good that well, not even just, it is a common good, but I really do think that what's happened with student loans and how honestly predatory they've kind of become and how little they have benefited people, because they're taking out these loans to go to school and then not being able to get jobs that can pay back for those loans. That is a right that needs to be wronged. And unless we have, some kind of magic bullet, I think it is right that, it's kind of it takes a village.
Sure.
And we need to be looking out for each other. And this is one way where we can look out for each other. Yeah, it might not be fair that, I now have to pay for, or actually, I'll flip that around. Yeah, it may not be fair that somebody else has to pay for, my schooling because, I accrued $50,000 in debt and didn't even graduate. But I'm going to be putting, money back into the economy. I'm going to be, and maybe this is more, my moralistic standpoint, but I'm going to be making sure that that's not taken for granted. And I think if there was a little bit more of that, then, it wouldn't be such a divisive issue. But
so I think you've got a lot of really good points there. This is a topic that I am conflicted on, I will readily admit, because on one hand, I do not think it's fair that someone who chose to go to a trade school, became an electrician, and works their butt off is having to pay now for someone who is unemployed or not employed in a well-paying job because they chose to study a field that is extremely competitive or not high income. So let's use the art history again, right?
But I think you're using two different metrics.
Okay.
Because people, people in trade schools work very hard. People in art history degrees also work very hard, with different skill sets.
Right.
And I study food science. It's not, it can be a very well-paying job, up there with like your typical engineer or something, but I decided to go into coffee roasting, which typically isn't very well paid. But I work my ass off. And I would put, the effort and the dedication and the amount of work that I put into my craft up against any person that's, in a trade school.
And that's a fair point.
And I think it's, you can look at the people that, they did squander their degree, or they went to school and didn't work hard and they just skated by and they got C's the whole time. But you're also putting them up against the people who worked really, really hard to study, regardless of what they studied, they worked really, really hard and they got C's because that's all they could manage, but they still worked really hard to graduate.
So let me ask you a question. And I'll use myself as an example here, and I want your honest opinion. I don't want you to, change what you're going to say because it's me, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say I go to college and I get a degree in history, which I did, right? I got 2 of them, actually.
I don't see that happening, first of all. I think your premise is flawed.
Don't get so heated. No. No, but let's say, I mean, I went to college. I got a degree, 2 degrees in history, knowing that my real, like the biggest opportunities for me would either be to continue on, get a PhD and teach at the college level, or go into secondary education, which I have done. And I got those degrees knowing what the job field is like, knowing what the pay scales are like, knowing that I'm not going to be a 6-figure earner as a teacher in a place where 6 figures actually goes a decent distance.
Right.
Because obviously, like, New York City teachers make 6 figures, but it's New York City. You know, my mid-level salary in the Midwest probably goes further.
Yeah.
But the question is, since I actively chose to get those degrees, knowing that I would only have certain opportunities for income, do I have room to complain about my lower income? Now, yes. What I don't want to take into account here is whether or not teachers or education are overvalued, undervalued, because that's a complete...
But I think that's a very, to use your favorite word and my favorite word, I think that's very germane to that specific example.
You're right, but that's not something that can be fixed immediately, right? That speaks to a bigger topic of the situation needs to be fixed. I'm thinking of knowing that there is a problem, I'm still choosing to go into it. Is that on me? And do I have really room to complain knowing that I made these conscious decisions, knowing about the circumstances and the situation?
Actually, you know what? This actually brings me to another thing that I talked about with the former executive with the Higher Education Commission. But what I will offer as a counterpoint, writers, typically not a job that you would expect to be high paying.
Right.
Do the people on strike right now have the right to complain that they're not being paid a certain wage from that? And I would say that, yeah, they do have a right. I would say that you have a right. I would say that I have a right to complain. And what the person that I talked to, what they said is that, and going back to, the predatory practices within how loans are distributed, is that what he has seen as the high-ranking official in this governmental body that deals with student loans and the cost of education and everything. What he's seen is that financial aid advisors don't do a good job of telling students what they can borrow, or what they should borrow, as much as they tell them what they can borrow. So what we're seeing a lot is that people are over borrowing when maybe they don't necessarily need to.
I think that's true. I mean, I can see that in my own experiences with financial aid advisors. I can see that.
And I think that plays into the part. So when you gather that up with the fact that the servicing of these loans have been outsourced to these third-party companies like Navient or Mohila, and they're jacking up the interest rates. Now, I will say, and this may have been conjecture on his part, I actually talked to him today, and he also said that when he went to school, what seemed to be happening was that because the borrowing interest rate, or the student loan interest rate, was lower than the interest rate that you could get for like a CD, a certificate of deposit.
Sure.
what a lot of wealthy students would do is they would take student loans, and because they had the ability to sit on that cash and still pay for, pay whatever payments they had to make for the loans, pay for their expenses, they didn't necessarily need that cash to be liquid. They would invest it in something like a CD, a money market account or something.
Sure.
They would actually make a profit for that. And in turn, that caused Congress to raise the student loan rates. And that's
interesting.
One possible explanation for how we got to student loan interest rates being so much higher than, Federal Reserve interest rates.
That's interesting.
So I think when you take all of that into aggregate, what you find is that students, and typically, students coming out of high school, students that we don't trust enough to be able to purchase alcohol.
Right.
We don't trust them enough to be able to rent a car, but we trust them enough to make a decision that about what they're going to dedicate their life to, and then borrow thousands and thousands of dollars on that, that desire that they have when their brain is still forming. I think that is a definite wrong that needs to be righted.
So I think you're making great points, and I don't think there's anything in there that I disagree with. I'll be honest. I don't think it's an answer to my question.
Sure.
I think you make wonderful points, and I think I definitely agree with the idea that there are practices that were incorrect. And looking at the White House fact sheet, what I think strikes me the most is not necessarily the loan interest rates or the loan amounts, but it's the fact that student cost of tuition has increased so drastically, but Pell Grants have not. Right? So
right.
Maximum Pell Grant is still around the same today as it was in 1980, whereas cost has more than doubled, almost tripled.
But that's on I believe, and I will certainly fact check this with the individual that I've been speaking to. I believe that's because Pell Grants are set by either by, I don't know if they're through federal, the U.S. Congress or state legislative bodies, but I mean, we've seen it time and time again. Like it's essentially the same thing as the federal minimum wage not being increased.
Ooh, that's an interesting comparison.
It's that these costs are rising, and we're so worried about saving money,
right?
Because we don't want to go into debt when we're the ones who decide what the debt is anyway.
So I would say then, perhaps in this particular instance, it's not necessarily a matter of, as far as a solution goes, I don't think it's necessarily a matter of getting rid of student loans so much as it is a matter of changing where that funding goes, because Pell Grants, just based on Wikipedia and the newamerica.org, Pell Grants are administered by the U.S. Department of Education. They're funded by Congress. And so they do have the ability to raise that rate, to raise the amount that you can get. And they haven't really done so much. So,
but I think the organizations so I think in Oregon, the organization that actually distributes the Pell Grants is OSAC, which is Oregon. They just changed the meaning of the acronym. It's the Office of Scholastic Achievement and Completion now.
Okay.
So like if you were a high schooler in Oregon and you submitted your FAFSA, it went to OSAC.
Interesting. Okay, so it's funded federally, but administered state.
Administered by, I believe, by a state agency. I'm not sure if that's correct.
But either way,
we'll check on that.
Either way, that's two different groups who could change the amount, right? Because if the state is receiving an X amount of funding, can't they just increase how much that is per student and change like the number of people who could get that?
I don't believe so.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I don't think they can. I think they can decide who maybe is eligible or they could decide. Actually, that's a really good question. I'll have to ask, because coincidentally, this person also worked at OSAC, so they would know. But I don't think they have nearly as much control over the extent or the reach that Pell Grants can, like how far Pell Grants can reach, as much as the U.S. Congress, who actually decides how much money gets put into the total fund.
Okay. So on that note, then I would think that the solution maybe isn't necessarily should we increase the amount of money that we're bringing in to fix this moving forward, but maybe it's restructuring where some of that money's going.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you provide free or at least cheaper education for students, then your tax dollars don't have to go to Pell Grants. Your tax dollars don't have to go to a lot of other stuff. So I mean, I guess what I'm saying and invoking the conversation that we did decide to not bring up, but I really what I'm saying is it's not 100% loss.
Right.
There is something. There are things that we can do to make up for the cost of forgiving whatever the $800 billion cost that it would take to wipe out debt for a lot of people.
On that note, I do want to say that as we've continued to talk, I think what happened is I went what my brother likes to call rock brain, where I got set into one idea that I didn't quite understand what you were trying to explain. And I think I get it better now, where you're saying that there's still going to be...
I don't think I did a great job of explaining it, because I also don't think I understand it.
So let me ask you...
talking to people who understand it a lot better than me and trying to reiterate what they've told
So
me.
then let me say what I think you were trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first, what I thought you were saying was that people don't have to pay student loans. That money goes straight back into the economy because they're going to spend it immediately on whatever they need to. And I was arguing, no, they're going to concentrate it just on necessities. I understand after getting through that, and as we've continued to talk, that essentially we're saying the same thing. Where
I think so in different ways.
Yes.
And maybe our priorities are different, but I think
agree.
The general idea is the same. That money is still going to be present within the economy.
Right. And so what I was trying to say is, where is that money going? And you were trying to say the fact that the money is going is what's important. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
So again,
basically because it all ends up as tax revenue. And that tax revenue is revenue that the government gets. So this money that the government is spending, the government will eventually get back.
So I do want to say, if I haven't already, I apologize for how heated I got.
No worries.
But
we have a podcast where we argue. That's the point. And sometimes it's going to get a little heated, but the important thing is that at the end of the day, I don't think any less of you. You don't think any less of me. You and I are still going to be friends, and we continued on with the conversation.
That's true. Unless you lose weight, then I will literally have to think of less you. Oh, man. If you're not watching the video, you should see the face he just gave me.
You should see how fat Andrew is what Cameron meant to say.
That's not what I meant at all. Not even what I meant.
I lost 5 pounds this month, okay?
Wow. Nice.
Feeling real good about myself.
I have plateaued in my weight loss. Anyway, so...
I'm just not eating junk. I've been going to the farmer's market and actually getting fresh vegetables.
I'm really glad you finished that sentence, because I thought you were going to say, I'm just not eating. And I was like,
I'm just not eating. I've been starving myself. I can't afford it.
Unless your student loans get forgiven.
No. Actually, no, because student loans have been deferred, so I would still be in the same position that I'm in now.
Right. So the other point I wanted to get at was back to my question. I guess my question is about an argument that I hear from people on the right, which is that I made these decisions and I should be responsible for my own decisions.
Right.
And even, I guess, room to complain. There's always room to complain. But should I still have to take responsibility for my own actions is what a lot of these people on the right are trying to say is the debate. Because if someone gets to use the stereotypical degree that the right has always used, and I don't agree with this choice. They always say, what if someone gets a feminist studies degree, which meh. But they're like, then
I mean, I think that's a fairly important degree.
I mean, I think
that can have a huge impact on the well-being of a lot of people and the progress of equality and equity within the American system, particularly with things like wage gap.
My issue is less with the content that you'd be studying and the fact that it's its own degree. That could easily be a sociology degree with an emphasis in, or a political science degree with an emphasis in. And that's not to say it's anything against feminist studies. That's to say I'm against the hyper-specific degree programs that a lot of universities are pushing towards. As an educator...
Can I offer a counterpoint?
Sure.
And then we'll move on.
Yeah.
I think the reason why it's its own specific degree is because pretty much any field of study within higher education is highly male-centric. And it's coming from the viewpoint of a man and how it affects men. And so the reason to have a different, a separate field of study is because it's something that's been ignored for a long time.
I can totally understand that. I think my issue is that it speaks to a larger problem where people are like, I have this hyper-specific degree that could just be biology.
Underwater basket weaving.
Exactly.
We'll use that.
Yeah. No, but so the
very impressive skill, not super.
How do they hold their breath so long? The argument I always hear is people get this feminist studies degree, they can't get a job, now I have to pay for this degree that I even disagree with. Like, as an educator, I will say, study what you love and something will work out, right? If you love studying feminist studies, study that. I really enjoyed studying the history of communist Poland. Do you know how many job offers I have gotten to specifically look at the history of communist Poland? 0, right?
Right.
But there's other skills that come along with that, which make me a good teacher, a good presenter, things like that. So I understand the whole study, and I encourage the study what you love, study what you want to talk about, study what you think about in the shower, that kind of a thing. Because something will work out.
Well, not everything that you think about in the shower. Some of that stuff you can keep to yourself.
The point is, I can understand the idea that they have where you've made your bed, now you need to lie in it. You make these decisions, you have to keep with the consequences of them. And I do think there is some amount of escapism here where people might think, I got this worthless degree, I don't want to pay for it. But I would also argue that is a minuscule number of people that we're talking about. I think the majority of people we're talking about are normal people.
Well, I mean, to that end, I think it's a supply and demand issue.
Sure.
If you get a degree in underwater basket weaving, you're more than welcome to do that. Job prospects for underwater basket weavers, not going to be that great. On what we're seeing, though, is teachers. There is a huge shortage of teachers, and teachers of high quality. And so the demand is high, the demand is high, but the pay isn't high enough to supply for that demand.
Sure. And I think,
and I think that's what you're seeing in a lot of industries is the demand for it is there, and the supply could potentially be there, but you have to pay the cost to make those add up. And we're not seeing
so
that. We're seeing everybody treated like they got a degree in underwater basket weaving.
Sure.
When they're a highly trained individual with a degree who has, proven their has all the bona fides that they need and is eager to do the job.
So that's one side of it. And you're 100% correct, I think, with that one side. But the other side isn't just supply and demand. It's also what value you can add, right? And yes, as a teacher, I am adding immense value, but I'm not adding it to any particular specific market or product, right? I'm adding it to
I would say that you're adding it to most markets and product because you're influencing the people that are going into industry later.
Yes, but if you're looking at what people are paying for, right? People are not paying for my middle school social studies class. They're paying for the writing that one of my students might do for a TV show 10 to 15 years down the line, and they get to make 15 grand per episode, right?
Right.
People who are making a good amount of money are people who are working in medical fields where they have these degrees, which are highly valued. They're people who are working in tech sectors, which have these computer science or computer practicing degrees, which again are highly valued and are in high demand. So you're right, supply and demand is part of it, but someone who is writing code for Netflix is adding more direct value to the economy or to a product than I am teaching kids about Henry VIII. Now, that doesn't mean that my job isn't valuable, but it means that in a market, someone is creating something that somebody else wants to buy and pay money for right now. And that is a big part of it, because I can get a business degree, I could get a computer science degree, and add this value right now to a ton of products. Or I could get a history degree and education degree, still have a major impact on society, but I'm not adding something to the economy directly that people can buy and goes to me.
Right. I think I don't necessarily disagree. I disagree with that the implication there that what you do and I think honestly I think like the teacher thing is a bad example because teachers are their own separate like societal, like we have to deal with how we value teachers as a whole other topic.
So instead of a teacher, let's think of maybe like a political science major who works for a think tank or who works for like a news agency, right?
Right.
They're not making as much as someone who is writing, doing game design. They're not making as much as someone who is doing project or UX management for some of these big tech companies.
Sure. What I would say is, I mean, really, I think it's a societal issue with our values and our insistence on instant gratification, not being able to see, the forest through the trees, and I mean, I think that's especially true with teachers, because if you have if you incentivize everyone to go into coding and web development and these quote unquote high paying jobs, what you're not going to have 15 years from now are shows that deal with anything other than code and web development. So take South Korea, for example. Being a teacher in South Korea is one of the most prestigious jobs you can have, and they pay them well. It's a highly competitive field, and they have a great education system. We don't have the same value for teachers here in America because we're not thinking long term. We're thinking about what is going to get us immediate profits, and that's because, I mean, really what all of this I think boils down to is that we've made everything a commodity, whether it's student loans, they're a commodity. And so you have Navient and Mohila trying to capitalize on that. You have, viewership, people's attention spans commoditized. So you have, Netflix, HBO.
You mean Max? It's just Max now.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. God, I don't even think I can count on one hand the number of different apps that HBO has had in the last 5 years.
Yeah. Anyway,
that's for another time. But really, it's. I mean, I think it's a failure of. I'm debating whether I should actually say this, but I am going to. I think it's a failure of people's belief in capitalism. I think that capitalism is an ideal where you have a demand, supply will fill it, and the people filling that that demand will be compensated fairly, and that's just not what's happening.
Right.
It's become more of an oligarchy where the rich keep getting richer and the people filling that supply are kind of just subjects of them.
Sure. But
going back to
good.
Going back to what you were saying though, I think that now I can't remember what you're...
So I was talking about, should I have to live with my choices? Should I have to live with the consequences of my decisions to study what I did, to go into the career field that I did? And if so, or even if not, a second side of that is, should other people then have to pay for my decision?
I think, you should need to live with the consequences, and market forces should apply to this.
Mm-hmm.
Supply and demand should factor in, but when you have, so here's my solution, and here's where really I think what's kind of gone wrong with people not being able to get lucrative jobs after college is I have to go back to trickle up economics. I think because we haven't raised minimum wage, it's become basically where, like we were talking a few episodes ago, you can find people with master's degrees working at McDonald's.
Right.
Do you think that they would rather work at McDonald's than, work at a university studying, 18th century English literature or volcanoes in the Mediterranean, or also shout out to my friend Sarah who does exactly that.
Wow.
And listens to the show.
Woo.
When you have these jobs where you definitely don't need a degree and are viewed as unskilled, but also require a lot less effort and commitment, and you can make the same amount of money, then the incentive to actually put in that effort goes away.
Sure.
And if you raise the minimum wage, then you raise people setting the wages for these higher paying jobs have to also raise their wages, and suddenly it becomes that you're a teacher and you're making what you should be making as a teacher. And I think that's especially a problem that we saw after COVID when companies like the Carl's Jr. down the street from me, they're offering $14 an hour, which is way above not way above, but significantly above minimum wage, and certainly more than they were offering before COVID.
And I think this speaks to a shift that we are seeing overall, is that the minimum wage is a minimum. And we often have heard that to be used in the sense of it's a minimum wage. It's not meant to be a living wage. It's meant to be a baseline. But
I think it should be.
And that's a topic for another time. I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm saying that's the argument I'm hearing. This, I think, speaks to another side of that argument where it's the minimum wage. That doesn't mean you have to pay it, right? Because Carl's Jr. doesn't have to pay the minimum wage. If they want to attract more workers, they can raise it to $14 an hour.
Well, yes, but I think actually, in a weird way, no. But hear me out. The legally mandated minimum wage, they're finding actually isn't the minimum wage because it's lower than the minimum wage that people are willing to accept.
Interesting.
Which is supply and demand.
Well, and yeah,
if you're not supplying a wage, like to reverse roles, if you're not supplying a wage that people need to survive, there's less demand for your job.
That is true.
So
yes.
People aren't going to be applying. So, I mean, it goes both ways. So the minimum wage, at least for Carl's Jr., is now $14, even though they're only required to pay, I think it's like $12.75 or something now.
That's an interesting way to think about it.
And I think that's what we're seeing in all other industries. Especially teaching. And why we have a shortage of teachers is because the wage that is being supplied is not meeting the demands of the teachers nor the needs of the teachers. So teachers are finding something else to do with their
right
time and effort.
So I think, and to go back to another point you mentioned where we've talked about how part of the student loan problem is the fact that so many people have degrees that now they can't get a lot of these jobs, or the fact that the degree is seemingly valueless. That's the supply side of supply and demand, right? The demand for degrees hasn't really gone up for a lot of fields, but the supply has drastically increased. And so if we look at some of these people who might be working at McDonald's or Carl's Jr., who are master's degree holders, I would be interested to see what those degrees are and what the job field for that degree is. Not to put blame on them and saying, you deserve to work here, but to get a consensus of what the situation is like. I think this is we could keep going. We always could keep going.
We could, yeah, but we've gone on for quite a bit already.
So I think this is a good place to end it.
First of all, thank you to everyone who's been listening so far. I will admit, this actually got a lot more viewership than I initially thought. I will say, Cameron and I are about 30 listeners short right now of being able to qualify for ad revenue, which would really help us out with improving the quality of the show. So if, anything that you can do to share, I hate it when people are like, make sure to smash that like and subscribe, but anything you can do to share this show if you've enjoyed it with other people would really help us out and would really impact the quality of the show.
Oh yeah.
Also, of course, we want to thank Halcyon Club for letting us use their song "This Life Is Tough But Fair" from their EP Headset Emotions. And I think with that, thanks for listening.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for listening, and I want to remind everybody that platypus are venomous. What a life, what a life, what a life, what a life.